I don't know how to use a condom. When I was in the 4th grade, I had my first sex education class. My health teacher sat the class down and read aloud Hair in Funny Places, a 1999 picture book by Babette Cole. Now, I'm not entirely sure how you go about introducing puberty and sex to a bunch of 10-year-olds, but I don't think this was the best way. I was hard-launched into learning about puberty by staring at drawings of naked British children with the rest of my class. Last I checked, I was in public school, not a seminary.
What?
Seminary, more like seminary. Am I right? I spent the rest of that class and my walk home hysterically crying. Flash forward 2 years, and that same teacher showed us the video Tea Consent. Now, keep in mind, gentle parenting wasn't really a huge thing at the time, so we didn't understand that we could say no to Aunt Miriam hugging us at Christmas dinner, let alone understand a metaphor telling us that we could say no to people. So when they poured tea down the unconscious person's throat, we all laughed. Not because we were monsters, but because we were kids. Kids that didn't understand what this metaphor was for. And then we got in trouble for laughing at the video. You see the problem? To this day, I firmly believe that consent should not be taught using a metaphor. Honestly, anything about sex and boundaries should not be taught using a metaphor. The last time that I had a sex ed class was in grade 7. The only mandatory sex ed class in high school in Ontario is in 9th grade phys ed, which I didn't take. So, with very little formal education on the subject, I turned to the next best thing. Netflix. Of course, I don't place all of my blame on my teachers. Most of it falls on this guy.
Hi there.
That lack of proper sex education, it lit a fire under my ass. I was spurred on to learn and teach about proper sex education. And that fire still burns, like an untreated STI, because all over the world, sex education curriculums are under scrutiny, and students aren't learning what they need to know about sexual education. Because I learned so much of my sex education from Netflix, I wanted to see if those shows actually measured up to what I should have been learning in schools. I've selected 3 of Netflix's biggest shows about sexual education, and for each of the shows, I'll compare the content to the current sex ed curriculum that matches the characters' age and location. As I go, I'll track which curriculum points are covered, and see if these popular Netflix shows can actually cover what schools are failing to teach you.
And our next category is songs about sex.
Big Mouth is an animated adult comedy about not adults. It follows a group of 12 to 13-year-olds as they navigate the horror show that is puberty. It's set in New York, so I looked at New York's sex education curriculum for that age group, grade 7, and what I found? Insane. There is absolutely no requirement to teach sexual education.
Oh my God, bro. Oh, hell no, man.
Are you ready? It gets worse. HIV and AIDS instruction is required. The curriculum does not have to be comprehensive. It must stress abstinence. There's no required instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity. There's no required instruction on consent. And parents can opt their kids out of the HIV and AIDS lessons if they promise to teach it at home. And there's also no standard for medically accurate information. So yeah, I could not find a centralized, government-issued sex ed curriculum for New York, because I don't think it exists. However, I did stumble upon the National Sexuality Education Standards outline, so I downloaded that and used that as my outline. Sex education is one of my all-time favorite TV shows, and it's also, I'm pretty sure, the first time I ever really remember seeing sex on TV. Sex education explores struggles surrounding sexual education and intimacy. The main characters are about 17 and 18, which in the UK correlates to 6th form, which is year 12 and year 13. It's never really confirmed, but considering the show goes on for 4 seasons, I'd say they're starting year 12 in season 1. Now, I'll be honest, I could only find and download the curriculum for year 11. It doesn't really look like sex education is that emphasized in year 12 and 13, so I couldn't really find curriculums for them, but from what I did find, it seems like the UK kind of has its shit together. Heartbreak High, the 2022 remake, is an Australian TV show in which students have to take a sexual literacy course after all of their sexual history has been leaked through a map that was written on a school wall. Characters' ages aren't made super clear, but they're often pegged as year 11, so 16 or 17 years old. There isn't a clear-cut year 11 curriculum, so once again, I kind of had to finesse this. I found a workbook online that included a curriculum, so I based it off of that. Is it government-sanctioned? Unclear, but I did my best to put together a curriculum based off of what was publicly available. So, now I have a rough curriculum outline for 3 shows along 3 different countries and age groups. None of these are official, most of them are vague, but I've made my own checklists based off of what each curriculum said students should be learning. I'll link the resources below if you want to take a look. Now, for the fun part. Time to watch the shows. Okay, so, I was going to start this ASAP, but I ran out of printer ink. So off I went to Walmart, a man on a mission to get my printer ink, and of fucking course they lock it up. Anyways, now I had my ink and I could get on with it.
Many months later.
Okay, so it's been a hot minute. My last video came out like 2 months ago, but I've been busy with work and finishing my college semester. But I finally finished all 3 of the shows. Personally, I think Big Mouth is hilarious. I started watching it when it first came out with friends, and I kind of stopped around the point when Andrew's mom started going through menopause because I didn't know what menopause was, and I just thought they were talking about climate change. And at the time, I had climate anxiety so bad that anytime someone mentioned being warm or hot, I would crash the fuck out. So, of course, her being like, oh, man, it's really hot. I was like, I can't do this. Oh, my God, there's climate change in Big Mouth. I kind of did the same thing with RuPaul Drag Race. It might have been season 1 or something, but they had to dress up based off of climate change, and that's as far into RuPaul's Drag Race as I got. Once I got over that, though, I started watching it again and enjoying it. I didn't even realize that, what is there, 8 seasons now? No, God, no. How many seasons of Big Mouth are there? Okay, yeah, so I was close enough. Season 8 just came out, and also apparently I didn't watch season 7. When I was going through this, I did not recognize a lot of season 7, so I have to watch season 7 and season 8. The first section of the American grades 6 to 8 curriculum that was provided by the National Sexuality Education Standards is consent and healthy relationships. The first part of this section, under core concepts, is the ability to compare and contrast the characteristics of healthy and unhealthy relationships. The main part that I feel like highlighted this point the most was in episode 5, when Nick's parents and Andrew's parents are out at dinner together. Nick's mom and dad are always really lovey-dovey with each other, kind of to like a weird extent, so it's really a big contrast in this scene when you see them kind of all over each other at dinner while Andrew's parents are just kind of fighting the whole time. Next, under core concepts, is describing how power differences such as age, gender, socioeconomic status, immigration status, race, or unequal positions such as teacher, student, supervisor, employee may impact relationships. I didn't really find anything specific that highlighted any of this in this season. Maybe there's something else in a later season, but I was only watching season 1 for this. Next is analyzing the similarities and differences between friendship, romantic relationships, and sexual relationships. There wasn't really a specific part of the show that really highlighted this, but in episode 3, Jesse breaks up with Nick, resulting in a miscommunication on Nick's side where he believes that they're dating and friends. Although there's no blatant discussion of similarities and differences between these relationships, I feel like it gets a pity point because Nick's family has a discussion around Nick and Jesse's relationship, and Jesse and Nick talk about how they are better off as friends. Finally, defining sexual consent and sexual agency. In episode 5, everyone is reading a book called The Rock of Gibraltar, which is a romance novel. When Nick asks his sister about why everyone is obsessed with it, she talks about enjoying it because it's about everything around sex, not just sex itself. It feels like other than all these 12-year-olds jerking it, this is the closest we got to talking about sexual agency. On the other end of the spectrum, however, in episode 8, Nick's sister Leah once again swoops in to talk about consent. I feel like whenever Leah's on screen, she's talking about something important, and her conversation around consent in episode 8, I think, was one of my favorite moments of hers in season 1. Up next in the consent and healthy relationships category is analyzing influences. First is analyzing how peers, family, media, society, culture, and a person's intersecting identities can influence attitudes, beliefs, and expectations about relationships. There wasn't really much to go off of here, so the 2 points that I did find were kind of a reach. In episode 4, Connie, who's Jesse's hormone monster, makes her lash out when she's having a sleepover, and she ends up being rude to Missy. The same thing happens in episode 3 with her being rude to Nick because of Connie's influence. So I'd say that's sort of peer influence in relationships. The other thing that I sort of felt fit into this category, and this is very much a stretch, is in episode 5 when Jessie buys a bra and everyone at school sexualizes her, which I feel like affected her relationship not only with her friends, but with her own body. Next is evaluating the impact of technology and social media on relationships. They didn't really bring up social media that much in this season, other than in episode 2, where the Devons, or Devin and Devon, were posting on social media, and that kind of seemed to put a bit of a pressure on their relationship, and in episode 4 when Devin was taking videos of Missy to post, which caused the 4 girls at the sleepover to fight. Finally is identifying factors such as body image, self-esteem, alcohol, and other substances that can affect the ability to give or perceive consent to sexual activity. Once again, in episode 5, Jessie's wearing her new bra, which not only affects her own self-esteem, but causes her friends to sort of perceive this bra as her giving them consent. There's also episode 8, when everyone is drinking alcohol, which, other than discussions of consent, affects the way that characters act regarding consent, such as Nick assuming that Tallulah wants to give him a blowjob, and Daniel being a head pusher, and Jessie and Jay making out. Next is interpersonal communication regarding consent and healthy relationships. The first point is demonstrating communication skills that will support healthy relationships. In episode 2, when Jesse and Nick start dating, they communicate boundaries and what they're comfortable with doing while they're on the bus. And in episode 10, Missy ends her relationship with Andrew in a way that I'd say demonstrated healthy communication skills.
There's no way around it. You're just too sweet for me.
Next is demonstrating strategies to communicate personal boundaries and how to show respect for boundaries of others. Back to episode 8. When everyone's discussing consent, they also discuss setting and respecting boundaries in an intimate setting. And in episode 9, Nick starts to set boundaries with his mom in a mostly respectful way. That, although hard, his mother respected until Nick said otherwise.
Good night, Jay.
Good night, Mr. Birch. Mom?
Next is self-management, which includes describing strategies a student might use to end an unhealthy relationship, including involving a trusted adult who can help, which was demonstrated in episode 2 when Nick discussed his and Jesse's breakup with his parents. He, of course, didn't manage the breakup well after he found out, but he was able to get feedback and confirmation of the breakup from his family, more specifically Leah. And in episode 9, Missy and Andrew break up, and they do so with both of their parents involved to discuss the fact that they are too young to date. And the final topic under consent and healthy relationships is demonstrating strategies to use social media safely, legally, and respectfully, which I don't think the show really did. So, out of the 11 categories under consent and healthy relationships, Big Mouth covered 9. Next is anatomy and physiology, which is a shorter category. Under core concepts, students are expected to learn about the human reproductive systems, including the external and internal functions, and that there are naturally occurring variations in human bodies. The opening of episode 1 talks about the process of ovulation, which briefly but thoroughly touches on a part of anatomy and physiology. And then in episode 5, Jessie's having a conversation with her own vagina, which apparently can talk, and lists off all of the biological parts of it, so that kind of covers anatomy pretty well. And then in episode 8, the characters briefly touch on, both literally and metaphorically, the mons pubis. Up next, also a short category, is puberty and adolescent sexual development. Under accessing information is defining medical accuracy and analyzing medically accurate sources of information about puberty, adolescent development, and sexual health. Of course, we've got the opening of episode 1 that explains the process of ovulation, and later on in that episode, Nick's mom talking about secondary sex characteristics. Episode 2 talks about periods, and episode 5 kind of talks about female libido. Next is gender identity and expression. This season doesn't really talk about gender identity much. I know a couple seasons later there's a trans character, but she's in a later season, and we're just on season 1 for this. Under the analyzing influences category is analyzing how peers, family, and a person's intersecting identities can influence attitudes, beliefs, and expectations around gender, gender identity, gender roles, and gender expression. Of course, there's a lot of sexism discussed, especially on Jay's end, seemingly because of his dad's law commercials, but most of the responses to his absolutely fucked up sexist statements were just people telling him to stop quoting his dad's law commercial, which doesn't fully demonstrate that what he's saying is wrong, because they're not really calling him out for what he's saying, they're just saying, stop quoting your dad's law commercials. Next, under accessing information, is accessing medically accurate sources of information about gender, gender identity, and gender expression. Nothing really discusses medical information in this show, especially not around gender identity, other than what I've already mentioned about, physiology and anatomy. But I do feel like I should mention that in episode 7, Matthew tells Jay that being gay and trans are the same thing, which, if not being taken for sarcastic, would be misinformation. Next, under interpersonal communication, is demonstrating ways to communicate respectfully with and about people of all gender identities. Again, nothing too specific there. And finally, under advocacy, a new category unlocked, is developing a plan for the school to promote dignity and respect for people of all genders, gender identities, and gender expressions in the school community. And this did not happen. So out of the 4 subcategories under gender identity and expression, I'd say Big Mouth gets a big 0. Next is sexual orientation and identity. Obviously, we're going to have a lot to talk about here because of the token gay character Matthew and the fact that episode's 3 main theme is exploring sexuality. Under core concepts, students should be able to recall the definition of sexual orientation and explain that most people have a sexual orientation. That didn't really happen in episode 3. I know there's an episode in one of the future seasons where there's a character who's pansexual and she kind of explains sexuality to a lot of people, so maybe it's covered under that, but like I said, that's a future season. We're on season 1. The next part of core concepts is defining sexual identity and explaining a range of identities related to sexual orientation, such as heterosexual, bisexual, lesbian, gay, queer, two-spirit, asexual, and pansexual, which didn't really happen as episode 3 just kind of explores male homosexuality. Under analyzing influence is analyzing how peers, media, family, society, culture, and a person's intersecting identities can influence attitudes, beliefs, and expectations about sexual orientation. During episode 3, Jay, Nick, and Andrew talk about being gay, and Jay says some homophobic stuff that affects how Andrew feels about the possibility of him being gay. Nick, on the other hand, is really nice to Andrew and even kisses him at the end of the episode, unconsensually, to try and help him figure things out. Next is accessing information and accessing credible sources of information about sexual orientation. Other than gay porn, Andrew doesn't really do any research, but he does talk to a bunch of gay ghosts, so like half points, and he takes the gay eye test, so take what you want out of that. Next, under interpersonal communication, is demonstrating ways to communicate respectfully with and about people of all sexual orientations, and as said before, Nick is respectful towards Andrew while he struggles with his sexuality. Finally, under advocacy, is developing a plan for the school to promote dignity and respect for people of all sexual orientations in the school community, which, like before with gender identity and expression, didn't happen. So of the 6 subcategories of sexual orientation and identity, Big Mouth got 3. Up next, and I apologize, this curriculum is so fucking long, is sexual health. Nothing under core concepts were really covered in the first page, which means that defining vaginal, oral, and anal sex, explaining that there are many methods of short and long-term contraceptions, and listing 4 methods of contraception were not included in Season 1 of Big Mouth. I know in Season 2 they have a full episode dedicated to talking about Planned Parenthood and STIs and contraception, but once again, we're not there yet. On the second page, continuing sexual health, they got 2 out of the 5 core concept learning goals. Under describing pregnancy tests, signs of pregnancy, and pregnancy options, including parenting, abortion, and adoption, there's 1 point from episode 6 about Jay and his pillow baby mama. Yeah, you heard that right, pillow baby mama, having an abortion. And then under describing the signs, symptoms, or lack thereof, and potential impacts of STIs, there is 1 kind of pity point from episode 6 where Jay describes his dick feeling like it's on fire after he fucked his bath mat. Next, under analyzing influences, is analyzing how alcohol and other substances can influence sexual decision-making skills, which was a main discussion point in episode 8, when Daniel's being a head pusher, and Nick accuses Tallulah of wanting to give him a blowjob. Continuing analyzing influences is describing the state and federal laws related to age of consent, minors' abilities to consent to healthcare, confidentiality in a healthcare setting, child pornography, sexting, safe havens, and sex trafficking. None of this was really discussed, but in episode 8, there's a little joke about ghost court after Nick talked to the ghost of Duke Ellington about seeing his naked lower half. Anything after that they didn't really touch on, so nothing in accessing information, interpersonal communication, decision-making, goal-setting, or self-management, which mostly has to do with STIs, contraceptives, and pregnancy. So, out of the 39 parts on the American grade 6 to 8 curriculum provided by the National Sexuality Education Standards, Big Mouth covered 18 of them, which is about 46%. Overall, I think that the curriculum provided by the National Sexuality Education Standards was really well done and really thorough. They had a whole bunch for a bunch of the different elementary grades. And I was actually surprised by how much was covered by Big Mouth. I forget that sometimes that show can be educational.
Let's talk about sex. All right. Let's talk about sex. A little bit.
Okay, so I was really curious to see how much would actually be covered by sex education, because with a title like that, you'd assume it would cover a lot. But I feel like I remember Season 1 covering a lot more than it actually did. In my own opinion, I think Season 2 was a bit more educational because Gillian Anderson's character, who is a sex therapist, was more involved in the high school's education surrounding sex, and it didn't just rely on Otis and Maeve. Alright, so the British curriculum didn't have the funky setup the American one did, so it's a lot shorter, but still thorough. The first category is healthy relationships, with an emphasis on learning what a healthy relationship looks like and recognizing good friends, colleagues, and partners. I feel like there was a lot of this actually shown in Season 1. In episode 4, Ruthie expresses her disinterest in her current girlfriend Tanya, telling Otis that she's uncomfortable having sex with her, but when she's engaging romantically and sexually with her other partner, Jessa, she likes it much better. Of course, she is cheating on Tanya, which is a big no-no, but this scene shows that Ruthie understands that her current relationship is not healthy for her, and she has seeked out another one that is healthy for her. In episode 5, Otis has an argument with not only Eric, but Maeve as well. Both of these arguments involved one of the friends discussing their position in the friendship and how they felt mistreated. Obviously, it's not good to feel mistreated in a relationship, but it's healthy to communicate this with your friend and grow and learn from that so that you aren't mistreated in this relationship. In episode 6, Amy has a talk with her boyfriend Steve about their sexual relationship, expressing that she's unsure of what she likes because when she's with her boyfriends, she's performing. This helps her recognize and learn what she likes, regarding sexuality, which shows the difference between Amy's past relationships, which weren't all that healthy, and her current one, which is. In episode 7, Otis talks to Liam about finding his person and that his quote-unquote relationship with Lizzie is not a healthy one because it is not one that Lizzie wants. In episode 8, Otis talks about Jean overstepping boundaries, which affects their relationship, and in the same episode, Amy leaves the friend group that she was in for majority of the season because they weren't nice to her, instead deciding to focus her energy on her friendship with Maeve. Next is intimate relationships and consent, with the objective of learning about contraception, resisting pressure to have sex, and understanding consent. In episode 3, a student books a session with Otis, not because he actually wants to talk, but to simply give the impression that he has something worth discussing. This moment contradicts the curriculum goal of resisting pressure to have sex, as the student's giving in to social expectations that he should be having sex, even when he isn't. It highlights how peer pressure and the desire to fit in can override personal readiness or authenticity. Once again, episode 7 talks about consent when Otis talks to Liam and convinces him to leave Lizzie alone by giving him his whole spiel. I also just wrote down condom scene, but I didn't write the episode or the timestamp, so I'm kind of just left assuming it's the scene where they're learning how to put on condoms. But Maeve just basically slams the condom into the, demonstration what's it called?
Hi there.
Condom demonstrator. I was close enough. Next is the topic of unacceptable behavior in relationships, including how to recognize and manage unhealthy dynamics. In episode 1, Amy breaks up with Adam, and by episode 2, she explains that it's because she finds him embarrassing. Admittedly, it's not the kindest or clearest way to end a relationship, and in episode 1, her breakup line is a vague, "it's not you, it's me" reversal, which isn't exactly the model of healthy communication. The show kind of leaves it to viewers to connect the dots and infer that Adam's aggressive behavior is what led to Amy not feeling comfortable in this relationship and being embarrassed by his actions. It didn't clearly model how to confront or communicate about these issues in a relationship, but I felt that it was closest to this. Next is sexual health and safer sex, where students are expected to learn about STIs, contraception, and making informed choices. We didn't really learn too much about STIs in this season. I know season 2 opens up right away with a chlamydia outbreak, but once again, we're on season 1, not season 2. The only scene we really get where we're learning about contraceptives, I feel, is the scene where Maeve and Otis are putting the condom on the condom demonstrator, but once again, Maeve does it really aggressively, so that doesn't really demonstrate it appropriately. I do feel like episode 3 really highlights making informed choices, as this is the episode where Maeve gets an abortion. This is my favorite episode, because I'm #woke and I love abortions. I'm kidding. I really love the connections between all the characters in this episode, and the scene where the 3 women that are getting their abortions kind of do the wave. That scene, it sticks in my brain. Next on the list is sexual orientation and gender identity, which involves exploring different identities in a respectful and inclusive way. In episode 3, Lily tries to hook up with Eric, but instead of doing so, they end up connecting in a different way, bonding over Eric's identity and his unique fashion sense. Then, in episode 4, Otis steps in to help Ruthie and Tanya navigate the relationship. The show treats this queer relationship with care, giving it the same weight and complexity as a lot of the other straight ones, and it's not played up for laughs or drama, and importantly, avoids fetishizing the relationship. And finally, in another one of my personal favorite scenes from the season, episode 7 shows Eric and his dad, who have spent most of the season misunderstanding each other, finally having an honest conversation. It's a quiet but significant breakthrough, where Eric's father begins to truly see and respect his son's identity. After that is emotional and mental well-being. The goal of this is to teach about the link between relationships and mental health. Episode 5 explores how Maeve's reputation as cockbiter had ruined some of her relationships, and at that, her mental health. She goes on to explain that this sort of sexual alienation and rumor has lasting effects on a person and their mental well-being. Next is resilience and character development. I low-key hate the word resilience. It just kind of reminds me of being in elementary school. We had this whole thing during assemblies where people would be given, a character trait that they really embodied. So, elementary humiliation ritual, you would stand up in front of the whole school and they'd be like, "Good job, Simon, you are resilient. Here's a slip to show that you're resilient." Of course, I ate it up and I would bring it home and be like, "Mom, look, I'm resilient." But now it's all I can think of when I hear the word resilience. Anyways, episode 2. Otis is at a house party when he stumbles upon Sam and Kate, who are at a rough patch in their relationship because of Kate's issues with her body image. Otis gets the two to talk to each other, and they grow as people and become more confident both in themselves and their relationship. I feel like Amy's character is the one who goes through the most personal growth throughout the whole show. Obviously, a lot of the characters have their own ups and downs, but Amy's growth as a person, both mentally and physically, kind of embodies personal growth the most out of all the characters. So, 1 resilience certificate for you, Amy. Next is legal aspects of sex and relationships, and like Big Mouth, it didn't really talk about that too much. Of course, in episode 1, after Adam whips his dong out in front of everyone at lunch, his dad talks with him about the legal implications of indecent exposure. And in episode 5, Adam's father once again brings up legal implications after Ruby's nude was sent to the school. Under legal aspects of sex and relationships is also sexual exploitation and abuse, which isn't really covered that much in season 1. I know majority of season 2 has to do with Amy's assault on the bus, but once again, we're not there. So that box remains empty. Lastly is online safety and digital literacy. I feel like episode 5 discussed this the most after Ruby's nude was shared. So, much shorter than the American curriculum, but I'd say much more covered. With a whopping 9 out of 10 categories covered, your boy doesn't need a calculator for that. Sex education covered 90% of this curriculum. Last up is Heartbreak High. I'm gonna be so real for a sec, this show low-key drives me crazy. Every time I try to watch it, I need like a recovery and debrief period halfway through episode 1, and then I can get back into it and enjoy it. In my personal opinion, I feel like Heartbreak High is some of the best teenage representation out of any show I've ever watched, and I think that's why I hate it so much. So many of these characters fill me with so much resentment because they remind me so much of people that I went to high school with. The Australian curriculum was also super long. It was pages upon pages of workbooks and scenarios and role plays, but it was a really thorough curriculum, and I feel like it touched on things that some of the other curriculums didn't really include. Up first is Introduction to Sexuality and Diversity, with emphasis on understanding sexuality issues, exploring personal and societal views, defining and using acceptable terminology, as well as social, cultural, and individual perspectives on sexuality and relationships. Darren's relationship with their family, including their mother, stepfather, and father throughout the season, is a good portrayal of perspective on someone's identity, specifically through Darren's identity as a non-binary person. No school is particularly vocal about their thoughts on Darren being non-binary, other than Spider kind of misgendering them in the first episode, but compared to a normal high school, everybody's pretty chill about Darren being non-binary, so I didn't really feel like that played too much into this, unless that's the whole point, is showing how people have grown to accept and learn that being non-binary is completely normal. And then in episode 7, Cash talks about being asexual Darren. He talks a lot about his struggles and feelings when it comes to being asexual, and Darren high-key sucks a lot of the time that he brings it up. Darren try not to be acephobic, challenge level impossible. I really liked Cash's portrayal as an asexual person. I remember all those years ago when I watched season 2 of Sex Education and seeing a split second of a character being asexual, I was so excited. So having a main character who talks openly about being asexual, I was stoked. Next is adolescent changes and skills, so physical, emotional, and social changes, coping with puberty and relationships, and developing resilience and communication skills. Queenie's development over season 1, specifically regarding her relationship with Sasha, was the most representative of this, in my opinion. I high-key hate Sasha so much. She is one of my least favorite characters. She's one of those, extreme leftists that is also super tone-deaf and sucks balls. Queenie learns how to speak up to Sasha about her ableist comments and gets more confident being vocal with her, and sometimes more confident being not vocal with her, like when she goes nonverbal during the student protest.
I'm gonna go because I'm obviously making things worse.
Shut the fuck up! Shut up!
Next is sexual health and risk awareness. Being aware of STIs, HIV, AIDS, and hepatitis, knowing myths and facts surrounding said diseases and infections, researching STIs and bloodborne viruses, examining sexual practices and safety, and understanding harm in sexual activity and drug use. In episode 1, Principal Woodsy talks about students using contraceptives when scissoring, to which Amory says that she doesn't think people can use contraceptives while scissoring, which Woodsy says is a dangerous presumption. In episode 1 as well, students partake in their first sexual literacy tutorial, or sluts as they call it. During this SLT, students play a game where they shake each other's hands. Said handshaking in this game represents an STI, with the moral of this game teaching students about the spreading of STIs. Episode 4 started with a trigger warning, which I feel like you don't really see in a lot of shows. I feel like most of them kind of put it at the end. I was watching Mormon Wives the other day, and when it got to the part where Jen was struggling with her mental health, they said, we're gonna cut the cameras for this, and at the end put if you or someone you know is struggling, which is kind of the most common thing that you would see is at the end, or sometimes in a YouTube video you'd see it in the comments section, or they'd say right before they speak, trigger warning for so-and-so and so. But not many shows actually have a trigger warning at the beginning of the episode, and I felt like that was really, I don't know, it was strong. In this episode, Malachi, while under the influence of drugs, faces a violent interaction with a cop, which greatly affects his mental health. During the end of this episode, after running away from Amory, Harper and Dusty, who also get high, take advantage of his emotional state and have a threesome with him. Sasha and Misty call out Harper's actions as well a few episodes later, highlighting the fact that he was taken advantage of, which was kind of the only time that happened. No one else really called out the fact that Harper took advantage of him, and through the rest of the season, she says that the threesome was quote-unquote consensual.
Come on, Harper. I don't care that you had a threesome. I read The Ethical Slut when I was 6 years old.
Consent under the influence is a tricky one. In some places like Canada, there are laws stating that once someone has reached a certain level of intoxication, they're unable to consent, and that consent is illegally given, whereas in Australia, there isn't really a law outlining that. There's just a law that acknowledges the fact that if someone is under the influence, they might not be able to consent. That being said, this covers harm and sexual activities and drug use. In episode 6, Harper saves Emery from having sex with Dusty because she believes that he may have contracted chlamydia from her during the relationship. Getting diagnosed with this STI and then having to tell people that she was sexually involved with, such as Dusty and Malachi, covers being aware of STIs, specifically the symptoms and transmissions. Up next is gender, power, and safety. So that would include gender expectations and stereotypes, understanding power in relationships, exploring assumptions about gender, power, and sexual safety, examining power, violence, and safety for LGBTQ youth, and strategies for dealing with violence. In episode 1, Queenie finds on the map that someone wrote that she has a lazy kebab, which is slang for someone having a large labia. This fits into gender expectations and stereotypes because Queenie was given this label out of a place of sexism and expectations for people with vaginas to have this seemingly perfect anatomy. Next in episode 4, with the power dynamic, is Sasha and Queenie's relationship. While at Mardi Gras, or I think they called it Mardi Gay, Queenie is stood up by Sasha and then later finds her doing drugs with Missy in the bathroom. Queenie confronts Sasha about her behavior, telling her not to make decisions for her and that she's not responsible for her.
Okay, but you have to understand that I don't want to be responsible for you if you have a bad reaction. You are not responsible for me. I am.
Sasha, being under the impression that she has to be responsible for Queenie because of her being autistic, adds an unnecessary power imbalance to the relationship that later causes it to end. In the same episode, after Malachi is assaulted by the cop, his friends try to come up with solutions to deal with the violent encounter and the power imbalance between a cop and an indigenous person. And in episode 5, the power dynamics were brought up regarding Harper's consensual, quote-unquote, threesome with Dusty and Malachi. On the topic of consent, the next learning objective of this curriculum is relationship values and consent. This topic touches on boundary setting, love languages, attachment styles, and of course, consent. Episode 3, strangely enough, touches on love languages, with Darren expressing that theirs were words of affirmation. Also in episode 3, Malachi and Amory have sex for the first time. I think that this scene was a really good representation of what healthy sex looks like in a relationship because the two of them were being very communicative, which is important for boundary setting and consent in a sexual relationship, which you don't often see in TV shows. In episode 5, during SLT class, the students talk about wants and needs in relationships. Openly discussing desires in a relationship is also important for discovering boundaries, love languages, and consent in the relationship. Of course, it goes to shit pretty fast when someone exposes Harper, Dusty, and Malachi for having a threesome, but it is a good exercise for learning about open discussion in relationships. Next is affirming diversity and combating discrimination. So that would be understanding and eliminating homophobia, affirming diversity, developing non-homophobic attitudes, and addressing harassment and discrimination. Episode 4 takes place during Mardi Gay, or whatever they called it, and the Hartley High students all go to the gay ball, where they watch drag performances and cheer on Darren as they vogue. This episode also acknowledges the dangers of having a cop at a pride event, something that has been acknowledged in the news and by many queer people for years before. Episode 7 talks further about Cash's asexual identity, which explores LGBTQ plus diversity, and throughout the show, Darren tries their best to build up a non-acephobic attitude. Emphasis on tries. Episode 8 also explores Darren's father's growth from being racist and homophobic as a teenager to having a black, queer, non-binary teenager. Solo poly hijabi amputee versus black, queer, non-binary teenager who's winning the woke off. Next is sexual safety and risk reduction, which is recognizing safety strategies in social and sexual situations, responding to the unsafe situation, reducing harm in risky behavior, and coming up with personal safety plans. In episode 1, Principal Woodsy mentions how alcohol consumption can lead to making informed choices, which I'd say covers most of the above expectations from this topic in the curriculum, and throughout the show, students continue to make bad choices while under the influence of drugs and alcohol. In episode 4, SLTs brings in a retired cop to teach students how to rack off, which was a self-defense class. This doesn't go well because Harper, having been selected as a volunteer to show the other students how to rack off, burns the cop with a lighter. Although not expected as a self-defense move being taught, it still worked to get the cop off of her, showing how Harper responded to this perceived unsafe situation. In episode 4, after Malachi is assaulted by the cop, the students work to try and respond to said unsafe situation. Amory's idea was to share the video of Malachi being assaulted online, which, if thought over and not done in the moment like they'd done, could have potentially been an appropriate response to the unsafe situation. And finally, in episode 7, Harper responds to the unsafe situation that her dad puts her in by stabbing him. Obviously, no one should be encouraged to stab their fathers and stuff, but like the lighter before, Harper used what she had in the situation to get out of something that was unsafe. Next up is sexual education and information sources, which is super relevant to the entire point of this video. The point of this topic is being able to evaluate sources of sexuality information, such as misinformation and media literacy, comparing knowledge with other Australian students, overcoming parent-child communication barriers, and understanding youth concerns about sexuality. In episode 1, as I've said before, Principal Woodsy talks to Amory about misinformation around using protection when scissoring, and also in episode 1, Jojo, who's the teacher for SLTs, discusses the need for a new curriculum, which evaluates the credibility of sources of sexuality information. And in episode 2, the SLT class watches a video about sending nudes. The video was made in a very similar way that consent tea was made. It uses noodles as an allegory for sending nudes to other people, but it was done in a way that was kind of hard to understand even on a rewatch. I knew it stood for something, but I couldn't quite figure out what exactly the noodles stood for and what the people in the video were doing by flinging the noodles around to each other. The students' criticism of this video would also cover evaluating their sources of sexuality information. And finally, health and school safety protocols such as blood spill procedures and living with STIs and BBVs. Other than Harper having chlamydia and Amory getting a nosebleed at school, nothing was really discussed in this category. I'd say the Australian curriculum was really thoroughly done and covered a lot of topics, and similarly, Heartbreak High covered a lot of the topics. Honestly, didn't expect the show to cover that much on here, so I was pleasantly surprised when it did. It got an 8 out of 9, which I believe is like 89%. So, finally, 3 Netflix shows and 3 sex ed curriculums later. Can Netflix teach you sex ed? Yeah, kinda. But that doesn't mean that it should. I find it kind of disappointing that these dramatized shows about teenagers on these way too expensive streaming services taught me more about sex relationships than my own free public education did. Comprehensive sex education in schools has been proven to reduce rates of sexual activity, sexual risk behavior, STIs, and adolescent pregnancy, and it does all of this without bias. These TV shows, as informative as they are told from an unreliable narrator. Otis is not always a great friend. Amory sucks a lot of the time. And Nick and Andrew are 13-year-old boys. There are 2 different instances of these shows having a main character try and sabotage a relationship involving a person they like, which is not something that should be taught, especially to impressionable teenagers. So yes, while Netflix and every other streaming service out there has shows that can teach you the basics of sexual and romantic relationships, it's up to school boards and government officials to recognize the importance of providing safe and accurate information in school settings so that their students can learn properly, and so they don't have to pay a gazillion dollars to streaming services to learn. That's all for this video, but if you liked it and you want to see me do more in the future, let me know, because I had a lot of fun doing it, and I'd be really curious to see how the rest of these shows chalk up to the curriculum. Love you guys. Bye.